This meeting is being recorded.
Okay.
All righty. Yes, sir. How you want to start it off?
Oh, well, you brought up the topic of, because yesterday, Charlie Kirk was assassinated. And so you brought up the question on, Charlie Kirk, his assassination and its relation to topic of white fatigue.
Right.
So, how would you like to approach this topic?
Um, you know, brief understanding, of where we're at as a country, just where we're at as American people and stuff like that. The amount of mass shootings and public shootings that are going on, nowadays are atrocious. What we saw yesterday, Charlie Kirk, getting shot in front of his family, in front of 3,000 people, it was absolutely disgusting. Um, you know, and that is not the way that you need to go about, selling your political beliefs. Or if if you have an opposite belief of somebody, you just can't go out and assassinate them. And one trend that you're seeing is, when there's going to be a mass shooting like that or a public shooting like that, 9 times out of 10, if you was to guess the race of a person, they're going to be a white person. You can put your money on that, and pretty much be successful, you bet, and stuff like that. So, it's starting to become atrocious. It's been a thing, since I can remember. You don't feel safe going to the grocery store, let alone going to a concert or, a mass gathering, because you don't know if one of these, extreme nut jobs are going to, go out and try to harm someone. It's just countless examples of that. One thing that I like to bring up is that, if, black on black violence, that's an insulated, occurrence that happens in a project or a ghetto. If little Pookie, goes over and shoots little Ray Ray in the head over, 5 pounds of marijuana or something like that, that's an insulated incident. That's going to stay within the black community. It's not going to affect white people in any way. Very rarely does black violence affect white people, but when there's a mass white violence like what's going on today, it's going to affect all Americans. Because it's going to get the media coverage. It's going to be in a different fashion. What I mean? It's most likely it's going to be political. It's going to affect our society. So it just has a bigger impact. It happens just as much as black violence happens in the ghetto. No one talks about it. So I kind of wanted to bring up that conversation and just start it.
Yeah. And yeah, that is something that we need to talk about. Violence that black people may engage in, as you said, is insular. It typically just affects people within the black community. Meanwhile, white violence tends to be more far-reaching and affecting everyone, including themselves. So if white people care about themselves, I think that they should take the violence coming from their own community more serious. But also wanted to mention something else, related to the topic of white fatigue, is that not only is there an extreme level of violence within the white community, I think that we also must approach the sexual degeneracy within the white community. White men
100%.
probably the greatest danger, or actually are the greatest danger to children out of any race in this country. And if you look at the pedophilia and the child molestation rates globally, white men just globally dominate that crime. And so I think that's something else we need to approach. Rates of pedophilia within white society. And not only pedophilia, but bestiality too. So not only the animals not safe, but the children are not safe either.
Oh, 100%. I actually just looked up an article. It's from the National Institute of Health. And it was talking about, the amount of white inmates versus any other, race of people, any minority, how much they are going to be the offenders of child molestation and pedophilia. And I mean, their numbers blowing it out the water. You know what I mean? It's just a staggering amount in the statistic. I believe it was, I think it was in like the 50s or the 60s or something like that. I have to go back and look and everything. But, it's just the amount of occurrences and the amount of heinous crimes that are committed, by white people versus, uh, the narrative that they're trying to put out and say you can't walk down the street in a metropolitan city, where there's going to be these crazy angry black people that's going to come mug you and kill you. I think that's honestly, of course, it's an issue that needs to be addressed, but honestly, it's the least of our problems. When there's going to be a bunch of mass shootings in public places where most of the time it's children. So.
Yeah. It seems that white crimes in particular, they harm children more because, as we said, white men predominate in child molestation and also in school shootings, which school shootings mostly affect children. So I think that in white society, there's an extreme lack of care for the lives of children. And this is something that we don't see replicated anywhere to the same extent in any community in America. And so I think that if we're going to improve the material conditions of this nation, just the world period, that this is something that we're going to need to address.
I think, in our society as a whole, you can't just put it on one race. I think that there's just a desensitization of death. If someone dies, whether you believe align with their political views or not, the first thing that's going to come out is memes and people cheering for their death and stuff like that. So there's just a really big, the internet is distasteful, and there's just a really big, just desensitization of someone's dying and someone's death. That's riddled in social media and stuff like that. So I think that's one thing that has to do with it. And then another, again, with all of these heinous crimes and stuff like that, we see it every day. It's just, becoming muscle memory, and we're just being desensitized from it.
And a point that actually you brought up in another conversation we had, you said that you think that white violence may eventually lead this country into a civil war. Would you like to expand more upon that?
I do believe that, just because both sides of the political spectrum, are displaying this type of violence, or, just rather it be violence, or, it be disrespecting our Constitution, or, disrespecting our due process, here in America. There's always it's been just a bunch of extreme occurrences that's been happening. Just a list of some, if you look at the right and some of their, heinous crimes, you got Dylan Roof. That was a little bit back in the day, when he shot up that black church in Charleston. And then I heard a rumor, I don't know if it was true or not, but once they captured him, the police officers, before they took him to the jail, actually got him Burger King. You know what I mean? So I think that that's actually disgusting as well. You got January 6th. And, another thing that I'd like to put on their side is that they have the most hate groups, out there and stuff like that. So, they're going to be the ones that's inciting the violence. They're going to be ones that's out there putting out the rhetoric, that's going to inflame, the current situation that we have now. And if you look on the left side, you do have the assassination of Charie Kirks. You got the person that shot up the Catholic church. I don't remember where it was at. Was that in Minnesota? Robin Westman. And then just a bunch of others. There was a school shooting today. No one got injured or anything like that. Again, they don't know who the suspect is, but I'm going to put my money on that. It was a white person. Let's be honest. And one thing that I would like to, expound upon as well is I think that it's kind of a slap in the face to their forefathers. In other words, let's say this country was solely built by white people, which it wasn't. There's just history is riddled with black assistants, especially when it comes to architecture and farming. But let's put that aside. I think it's a disrespect to their forefathers. If their forefathers was the ones that created this country, and then this is how you repay them by tearing it down and killing one another, and just creating or just carrying out these heinous crimes. I think it's a spit in the face, to American forefathers. Um, you know, but all of these instances combined, uh, is going to spark a civil war. Earlier today, when I was watching the news, Donald Trump, instead of bringing the country together, he was again inflaming it by saying that it was a bunch of Democratic rhetoric that sparked all of this stuff. And the same thing on the other aisle as well. I'm somebody that's going to be an independent. I don't support either group. I think both groups have just used black people in the past, more so the Democrats, honestly. But they're just both inciting this violence. And it's just gonna be like a bomb that goes off one day, and then we're gonna be the full blown war.
Yeah, I did see what Trump said, and it's true. He used it as an opportunity to divide. And it's because American politics, it's just a game. It's no different from like you know, supporting your favorite basketball team or your favorite soccer team. You just stick with your side no matter what. And ultimately what gets hurt at the end is the country, right? The country torn apart further. Um, and I think that this is just I think what we're seeing is that this country is being torn apart by white tribalism. You know what I mean? Because for the most part, who's carrying out these attacks, and then who's getting online and blaming these attacks on the other side? It's mostly white people. Let's be honest. And so, what we're seeing is that white tribalism, right, inter-white beef, is destroying the very fabric of this country.
Oh, 100%. And I think there was it was in Charlotte somewhere where a Ukrainian immigrant woman was stabbed by some black guy in the hood or whatever. Again, a disgusting, heinous act, which is condemnable. But when it comes to all of these school shootings, harming children, are we going to condemn these people? Are we going to call them animals? Are we going to call them disgusting thugs? Because that's what they are. It takes some type of premeditation to be able to, get in your car with a loaded firearm and go to a school and shoot innocent children. And that's just not something that you see, coming out of the black community. You see it coming out of, the white community, and it makes you not want to be able to go out and enjoy yourself. I mean, you don't know if you can't gather in, a big group of people and not have that fear looming over your head. It makes you uncomfortable, and it's disgusting. Um, you know, and that's just something that you just cannot blame, on the black community. you know.
Yeah, this is something that I think you've noticed. I think pretty much anyone who's paying attention will notice is that whenever, you know, whenever a crime comes out of the black community, whenever a black person commits a crime, then it's the entire community must answer for it, right? The entire community, the entire race is guilty of it. But when it's a white person, then it's just that person's an individual. It's not the entire race, It's not blaming the entire race, but also you'll notice the language used against black criminals is much harsher than the language used against white criminals. If a white guy goes into a school and obliterates dozens of children, then he's mentally ill. Maybe he was bullied. They take into account all these things that may have caused him to do this. When it's a black person, it's a barbaric animal savage, and he needs to be taken off the streets. And I have no issue with talking about criminals in the second manner, but I think it should be applied amongst anyone who does any act like this. So the school shootings are disgusting and wrong. And I think what the black man in Charlotte did was also disgusting and wrong. And we should be fair.
100%. And when you take a life, you should be thrown in chains. You should be treated like an animal, and then the death penalty should be something that should be brought up. Um, you know, but we have to use the same language. When we're talking about these pedophiles, when we're talking about these people that are going to go out and carry out a school shooting, and harm young kids that had their whole future ahead of them and stuff like that. I look at those people, as honestly, I look at them more condemnable than somebody committing a crime, in the hood, black on black violence, if you will, and stuff like that. If you take somebody out that's innocent, even that woman that was killed in Charlotte, didn't seem like she was doing anything to harm anyone, and her life was tragically taken away. You know what I mean? But nobody's going to talk about, the comparison, between, okay, that happened, that was somebody that was, in the projects and stuff like that. And it's arguable that he was mentally ill as well. But my whole thing is that, okay, that stabbing that happened in Charlotte, that's going to go down in the books as black crime, right? All these school shootings and all in the pedophilia, is that going in the books as white crime? Because the statistics are going to be right there, neck and neck with black people or more. I can count, I think about 3 or 4 mass public shootings that happened just in this week alone. So are they logging these as white crime events? Just because it's going to be pretty much a comparable statistic, across the board. I think they're kind of sweeping it under the rug when it comes to actually logging it as a crime statistic.
Yeah, and while we're here, I want to see if I can find something related to the stabbing in North Carolina, because I do know that recently a black woman was actually killed by a white man,
and they got no traction. I never heard anything about it. But
yeah.
Again, the stories of and just crime in general. If you take fentanyl use, take fentanyl use as an example. You know what I mean? I'd say that the rates of fentanyl use and the deaths of fentanyl use, are more on the white side of the aisle. You know what I mean? And there's plenty of different programs for if someone gets caught with whether it's a small amount of fentanyl or a large amount of fentanyl. There's programs to get them sent to rehab and stuff like that. The best rehab for somebody like that is going to prison. You know what I mean? For a very long time to get all that stuff out of your system. And then, hopefully you can use the rehabilitation process that the prison offers and stuff like that, but, calling these people, and giving them a way out when they committed a crime. If a black person, in the 80s, was caught with a baggie of crack, it was a felony. And so is, fentanyl, but there was no program to, get them out of the trouble. They had to do the time, in other words, so I think that that's the same, type of deal. It's comparable.
Yeah. What we can see is that this country suffers from severe racial bias in the justice system. Whenever something tends to affect white people, there's programs set up to minimize, the damage and to harm reduce. But, if black people are committing similar or the same crimes, then, it's the immediate worst punishment possible. And we can see is that the system is really also set up in a way to almost promote black crime, to promote black criminality, so they can continue locking you up, but the cops can continue, just mistreating you, and now they feel justified about it. And the media
Right.
amplifies any act of black degeneracy. Meanwhile, ignoring tons of white degeneracy.
Right.
But if they do talk about it, as I said, that person's an individual, but it's not reflective of the entire community. But when this happens with black people, then that's not the case.
And then it goes back to, just the mental change that black people have, within their minds. I'd say the majority of black people are still, slaves, mentally. In other words, just because they repeat this cycle, and there's nobody that's forcing them to do it. It's them on their own. They've been indoctrinated. They feel like they have to do these things. A lot of the times, the males think they have to do these things. Um, you know, it's going to take them to manhood, robbing somebody, killing somebody, selling drugs to your neighbors. They think that's going to, bring them into manhood. And then once they get into manhood, they go down the street, they have a beef with somebody, they go and kill them. That makes them a man. And then, when the white police officer or the white official comes and puts you in chains, there's no form of resistance or anything. You just put your head down and get in the car and you go to, the precinct. You know what I mean? So I just think us as a whole, in that regard, we're really weak and docile. We only inflict pain pretty much on each other with a couple of you know other instances that we hurt somebody outside of our race. For the most part, we just hurt each other. And then once the white person comes and puts the chains on you, um, you know you just bow your head and you just accept your fate. There's no type of resistance at all. If you're really that tough, if you're really that much of a gangster, you know, um, and you're so-called being oppressed, and this is what you want to talk about. I can't do nothing because the white man's holding me down, and this, that, and the third. But when the white man actually comes and holds you down, you don't do anything about it. So, I think that's again just part of the mental chains and the mental, just the mental bondage that Black people are in.
Yeah, that's something that I like to talk about. Black people. I'm just speaking this globally. It's not just here in America. I think we have a severe issue of docility. I don't know if that's a word, but I'm just going to use it. Docility. You're right. We do only inflict pain on each other because I think you can even apply this to the African continent. There's war raging across the continent where, two different tribes of Black people are killing each other because maybe they speak a different language. Meanwhile, they do nothing to these multinational companies, which are raping the entire country and taking its resources. And I have my beliefs as to why I think the Black race as a whole is so docile. But I think really that the change is going to come from owning our own media so that we can be in charge of our own narratives. Because, a trend I used to notice, and I think this is kind of dying out, good, but I think it's starting to die out, is that I'm not seeing as many slave movies come out because they used to be a factory churning them out. Every couple of years, there'd be a new slave movie that came out.
Right.
And I think that was just to further pacify the population. And I don't have an issue with slave movies.
Slave comedies, because Black people like to laugh too. So
yes,
distract them with laughter. And we're easily distracted, man. You really can't sit here and say that nowadays where the white man's holding you down, just because that's so far from the truth. You know what I mean? It's yourself holding yourself down, living in the past and living a doctrine that you were indoctrinated with 100, 200, 250 years ago. It's just not that way anymore. If you was to remove yourself from the situation that you're in, remove yourself from the projects and remove yourself from, whatever, trials and tribulations that you're facing in that community, and you was to move somewhere else and start a new life and educate yourself, and get gainful employment, and then try to rise up that ladder, you're going to see the success as any other person that, has a different skin color. I do wholeheartedly believe that. And, in some ways, I guess I do have to agree with, some of the right wing nuts out there, when it comes to that aspect of it. You know what I mean? But, when they want to bring in eugenics and all of these, weird ass charts and
IQs
studies that they got, you know what I mean, about IQs. It's just ridiculous. You know what I mean? I meet more, you know, people that have their doctorate in medicine, that are from Africa than I do white folks. So I mean, it just baffles me that they want to, make a scientific argument with no actual basis of facts.
Yeah, they bring up you probably can't. Yeah, you can't see that, but I
No,
pull up
what
an
is it?
IQ. You really can't see that. It's too
No,
bright.
I think I've seen that map before. It's just idiocy, because they bring it in. I'm assuming that's a map from Africa.
Yeah,
You know, yeah, and African parents specifically, they pride themselves on, pretty much forcing their offspring to get, a well education.
hmm
So if you want me to believe that, with the strong uh, 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 parent system there that's pushing their kids to get a education, a collegiate education at that, that their IQs are still low. I just find that hard to believe. I'm sorry.
yeah. And something I want to mention is that there's this thing I'm noticing is that every year or so, the IQ, the estimations of all the different countries throughout Africa on the IQ charts are getting lower,
Right.
right? The numbers are getting lower, and so it seems like, according to these people, black people are getting dumber. Like we're actively getting stupider.
Right.
I just don't understand because I think typically, right, the estimate was around that black people have like a below 80 IQ, like somewhere in the 70s, which isn't true.
Right.
But now I'm starting to see certain countries have like their IQ, their average IQ scores in the 50s. Like a country couldn't function. Everyone, a
Right.
country couldn't
Exactly.
function.
It wouldn't be a country anymore. They would just be running around slinging doo at each other and hitting each other over the head with
Yeah,
clubs.
I saw a meme
That's just
actually.
true.
It showed a gorilla next to a black person, and it had like a score over the gorilla's head, and it says 85 IQ, and it showed the black person, it says 65 IQ.
Right.
And, I don't know if it was just
It's just funny rhetoric at that point. You know what I mean?
it is funny because you can't
Mhm.
talk to a gorilla. You can talk to a black person. Even
Right.
if the conversation is not intelligent, you can talk
Right.
to a black person. You can't
Yeah.
talk to
No. It's just idiocy. You know what I mean? And all of these things can be debunked with just a quick Google search. You know what I mean? But that's part of you know the reason racism is faith based. It's like a religion. You know what I mean? You can't see it, you can't touch it. You just believe that it's there. You know what I mean? Um, and so that's kind of like the dark process. Behind how can they say these ludicrous things and to be debunked like that. You know what I mean? It's just a belief system. I think you said something profound. A part of black people globally being docile is just the practice of you know uh, monotheistic religions that didn't come from Africa to begin with. um, you know so I think that that's part of it. um, and then just social media, just hundreds of years of pseudoscience, telling you that you're inferior. I think it was Thomas Jefferson that said that um, blacks are equal in memory and then inferior in when it comes to arts and intellectuality. So this is just been a belief system for hundreds of years. And it's just, do I think it's ever going to go away? No. But I think it's up to people like us just to excel, and just prove it wrong.
Yeah, I remember reading that. Um, and I think something else that we have to mention is that there is a profound, and I mean a truly profound disrespect of Black history. And I mean whether it's in the diaspora or on the continent of Africa. Um, to me, Black people, when they think of Black history, they split up into struggle and rap. And rap, I guess you could kind of put under struggle. But
Right.
um, they know about slavery, Jim Crow, and all that segregation.
Right. What
Uh,
happened? What happened before all that stuff, though? You know what I mean?
yeah, but also I like to say when we're speaking about Black American history, because a lot of black people I know, they can recite the entire history of rap. They know every rapper, every album they've dropped, but they can't name any black American inventors.
Right.
You know, like the Gamma Electric cell, if I'm not mistaken, something that's needed for phones to work, was created by a black man in America.
Uh-huh.
Before the Wright brothers, there was a black man that actually had a patent for a working airplane.
Right.
And then on the continent of Africa, most black people never touched that. They want to be everything outside. They want to claim the Native Americans are black, the Chinese are black, whoever else was black. Um, but what I see is that there's a obsession with Egypt. And I'm not here to talk about whether the Egyptians were black or not. Even if they were, let's just say they were, there's more to black history than just Egypt. And I think that
Right.
black Americans need to just, and not just black Americans, but Africans are ignorant. There needs to be a greater
I
focus.
mean, when I'm thinking about, sub-Saharan African history, I exclude Egypt. You know what I mean? Because is it an argument that were we there before this, and the third? I mean, sure. I mean, the first migrants to the land of Egypt, I'm gonna put money on it that they were dark skinned, but you know, do I have any concrete evidence? No. But you do know that the Nubians, conquered that land and occupied it for a long time. And then, when you're talking about sub-Saharan Africa, you have Ghana was a world power at one point. You got the Songhay tribe. You just got so many different dynasties and you know just kingdomships that we just don't really take into account, and then no one really hears about, know about, and they're not really in the history books as well. You have to go out and search for these things. When you're looking up European history, there's a million books on it. When you go to look up African history, it's maybe 10 to 15 books on it. I don't think it was anything that it was erased, but it's just something
It's
that was kind of
ignored.
suppressed. Yeah, ignored. So
Um, while we're here, we have about 5 minutes left. Uh, I would like
yeah,
to
we-
mention that I like to show his account. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, I don't know.
I can't see that.
I think my brightness. Maybe.
No, I still can't.
Well, there's this guy. His name is Isaac Samuel on Twitter. He covers African history, and as far as I've seen, he does the most academic studies on African history. If you just, and it's all of his sub-Saharan African history. He only covers North Africa whenever it has to be mentioned. So this is all verifiably, undeniably Black history. And sometimes he branches off into like diaspora history, but I recommend him.
I think I've seen them before.
Yeah, I'll send him to you whenever we're done with this. But yeah, I just want to mention that because it's important to have a grounding. Because I was thinking about it today. Pretty much any race, for the most part, can name things that people have accomplished. Black people are the only people who can't. Like,
Right. Out of so many accomplishments, we can't name one. So
we generally don't know. It's actually insane. Because most people aren't too educated on history, but I realized every race can name something. The only other people I think maybe are close to ignorance as us is maybe Latinos, considering a lot of them are ignorant of pre-Columbian history. Because I called this Mexican guy. I called him an Aztec, and he really got mad at me. He got offended. He wants to be Hispanic. He likes that identity more. But yeah, I just think that by being ignorant of what your ancestors did, it's disrespectful. You don't have to be a scholar in history, but you should at least be able to name things when we're done. And so I don't know. How do you feel about this? Would you like to cover some African kingdoms in our next topic?
100%. I would be, more than happy to do that. I'm gonna really have to dig in my bag and, brush up and do my, personal research too. But that's something that I love to do. I'm passionate about it. So, yeah, I wouldn't mind that one bit.
Okay. You have anything else to say?
I think we can wrap it up now. So, yeah, thank you again.
All right. Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
All right.